Hi everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 15 of the podcast series. We've come a long way, I suppose. 15 episodes, it's pretty great. So welcome if you're new to the podcast. It's nice to have you here, and if you're coming back, thanks for coming back. You can find me just about everywhere as Knitting the Stash, on YouTube obviously, on Ravelry, on Instagram, and on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, smack dab in the middle of the United States. And this is a podcast about knitting, spinning, and so a lot of times about DIY and kind of tips and tricks, kind of taking you through my knitting and spinning journey. And it's also a podcast where I try to feature a lot of indie artists and farmers and their work. I do that on the blog as well. So if you're interested in those things, you are in the right place, and I'm happy to have you here. Today's show, I have some finished objects, which are pretty exciting. I have some works in progress, which are mostly a spin that I want to talk to you about. The other works in progress, I think I'm going to hold off until next time around, until they're finished objects, because I've talked about them before. And I actually finished so much stuff in the last couple weeks that I was kind of out roaming around Ravelry trying to find some new things. So I have some new things to show you that are going to be on the needles that are really exciting. And so, yeah, and then the final part is the giveaway. And we'll talk about that in a little while. So, today, FOs, some exciting things. This is the Aileas sweater that you saw in the last podcast, minus the button bands and the collar and all the finishing work. So this is all done now, and if you'll remember, I worked up a first version of the Aileas in this really cool eggplant that I dyed. This is some Shetland that I dyed from Illinois with a contrast collar, kind of purple inside. And this sweater ended up feeling a little bit more formal after I had finished this version. So I'll just talk mostly about this version. If you want to hear about the other Aileas, I will put a link in the show notes to the podcast where I talk about the first version of Aileas. And Aileas is an Isabel Kramer design. It's a beautiful top-down cardigan. And what I'm going to focus on today is just some of the differences and some of the interesting things about knitting it twice and knitting it with a different kind of yarn. So as I said, the first time I knit it with Shetland. That was a kind of local Shetland that I overdyed. And this time I made the Aileas in the Isle yarns, which is from the UK. I bought the yarn directly from the farm, which is, I think, a great thing to do. You can buy the yarn directly from the folks who are producing it. It's pretty amazing. Sarah of Fiber Trek would talk about that as, I think, as Soulful Stash, and I've mentioned that before. By the way, her podcast is excellent. She just has a new episode out, and a new puppy. Oh, and the new puppy is in the episode. It's so cute. But she also talks a lot about knitting and spinning and sewing. Anyway, Sarah of Fiber Trek, go watch her. She's awesome. She's the one that got me into place-based yarns and thinking about where a yarn comes from, and into visiting farms, and that's when I went out to the Finger Lakes woolen mill and got some Hog Island, all because of Sarah. So if you're interested in those kinds of things, about thinking about where your yarn comes from, then her podcast is definitely for you. So this yarn is cool because I got it directly from the farm. It came in this little package wrapped with brown paper and yarn, and it was just really adorable. This is the Smeedmore Clothes colorway, and they name all of their colorways after the different enclosures that the sheep are in, which I think is just really cool. And the yarn is a kind of composite yarn of the sheep that they have out there on the farm. And you can read more about them. I'll put a link in the show notes to their webpage, and you can read about their farm and their practices and how you can get some of their yarn. There are a couple stockists in the US. I think the Woolly Thistle is one. I think Wool and Honey is another. And they're both, I think, on opposite coasts of the country, but they do stock some of the Isle yarn DK if you don't want to buy it directly from the farm and have to deal with customs and waiting a long time for the yarn to get shipped. I really wanted this colorway, so I wanted to wait and get it directly, make sure I get the right thing. And one of the reasons I wanted to do a sweater in this colorway is that Isabel Kramer put up 2 test knits of her own, and one of them was in a kind of lovely heathered pink, and I just couldn't resist making a sweater in that color. Okay, so a couple things about this sweater that I noticed. I knit this in the DK weight yarn, which in the UK is kind of a jumper weight. There are different, if you use like a 4-ply yarn in the UK, that generally means fingering weight, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And more this DK weight, double knitting weight, is more of a jumper sweater kind of weight yarn, somewhere between a DK and a worsted. The thing I noticed about knitting with this particular yarn after knitting with the Shetland, which was a very, definitely a worsted, if not going toward Aran, bulky kind of weight. My gauge swatch wasn't on point for this particular yarn, so I made a few modifications to the pattern, and I didn't change needle size, I don't think, but I did knit 2 sizes up in the sweater, and I made some modifications to the numbers of stitches in various places. The result is that I like the sweater, but it has a much more relaxed feel, not only because of the modifications to the pattern, but because of the yarn itself. And you can see the drape of this sweater. It's much more kind of just, it sits a little bit more kind of fluidly than the Shetland did. The Shetland is a little bit stiffer and a little bit more formal. That's why I said it was a little more formal. This one feels like the kind of sweater that I would kick around in just every day. The other one feels like something I'd wear to work to teach in. So I'm really happy to have both versions. I did another contrast collar on this one, and I think you can see it there. I decided on a really light, kind of pretty gray yarn from Tanis Fiber Arts. I had a multi-pack of her yarn that I got a long time ago, and I've been making various things out of it. They're kind of not minis, they're a little bit bigger than minis. I don't know what you'd call them. They're like bigger than minis. Anyway, they're about, I don't know, maybe 150 yards each, something like that. So I had one in this really pretty gray, and I decided to do the contrast collar in that color. But I also ran some of the pink through it, and you may not be able to see it here. I'll try to do a close-up picture and insert it if I can, so that you can see that. Just to add a little touch, like to keep the pink kind of flowing through. I also did, just like I did on the other sweater, to turn the collar, I put in an extra purl row, because that helps to turn the collar a little bit more easily. And then I knit an extra couple of rows in the pink, just so that the top of the collar wouldn't end up being gray, you know, so that from this angle, it all looks pink as you wear it. Buttons, I did the same number of buttons. Except that I've got like some kind of hang up about buttons. Neither of these sweaters, which are lovely and finished and perfect and washed and everything else, neither of them have buttons. I actually had a dream, I think it was last night, that I found the perfect buttons for these sweaters. I'm like dreaming about the buttons, but I just can't bring myself to actually find the buttons. And I've looked, but nothing's like quite perfect. So I gotta really put my mind to that a little bit more, and put my internet toward it and see if I can find the best buttons for these sweaters. They will have buttons eventually. I'll show you the back just so that you can get a sense of how it looks back here. You can see the drape is a little bit different if you were to compare this with the Shetland, which is a little bit stiffer of a wool. But I love the way the collar worked out. I love the shaping on the sleeves. And one other thing that I did with this one that I didn't do with the original Aileas is you're supposed to, the pattern calls for this excuse me, particular, what do you call it, faux cable to be continued on the underside of the sleeve, and I just didn't do that this time. I felt like you can't really see it all that well, and I did include the cable detail in the actual sleeve, so I just kind of left it like that, and that's how I like it, and I'm really looking forward to wearing it next fall when the weather actually gets cooler again. It has been 90 degrees here in Illinois, and today it's a little bit cooler, but we've went straight from like heat to opening the windows for like 3 days and then straight to air conditioning. So it's not exactly wool sweater weather right now, but I am looking forward to wearing this once it gets a little bit cool again. So that's finished object number 1. Finished object number 2 I am wearing. This is even though it's a little bit warm. This is my loop shawl. This is Casiopinka's design. And I knit this in 2 different sock yarns. The first, and I'll show you the yarns first here. So I knit this in Megan Morell's Old Crow art yarn. Got a little fuzz on there. This is the Wolfman colorway. I'm not really getting let's see if I can get the focus to go. There we go, I think that worked. This is the Wolfman colorway. And I used as my contrast, this was a Hedgehog Fibers in Aquazoo. All right. And the cool thing about Casiopinka's designs, and I'm going to try to see if this will work out. There we go. Is that they are intended for variegated yarn so that you can kind of break up the colorway a little bit. So you can see it's a crescent shawl, and it's knit from the center right here. I'll point with my nose. The center part down and out, and so your increases are along the top edge here. You can see those, right? That's where your increases happen. And as you're increasing, every 10th row, you add one of these kind of bobbly rows in. And they're not bobbles, they're, I think they're just called loop, she calls them loop stitch. And you can see you're basically doing massive increases and then you're slipping stitches to create these little bobbly things. And then towards the bottom, you do a few rows of garter in a smaller needle to create that finished look. And the bind off is an I-cord bind off, which is an awesome way I found to bind off things like shawls so that it has a lot of stretch on this bottom side. And the finished edge is just, let's see if you can see it on here. It's pretty incredible looking. So this is Loop by Casiopinka, and it is knit in the Old Crow art yarns and Hedgehog Fibers. And Megan Morell of Old Crow art yarns, if you are watching, I will be putting up some photos of this on Instagram and on Ravelry. And I know you love to see finished objects made out of your beautiful yarn. So here you have one, and I love this. It's really quite a beautiful shawl. So when I finished knitting it, it felt a little bit, compacted and tightened and a little bit small, as knits are wont to do once you've been knitting on them a while. And so I just happened to be watching a bunch of my favorite podcasts, and I watched an episode, this was episode 26, I think, of Anna Knitter's podcast. That's Anna Knitter. And she had a great episode where she showed a bunch of shawls that she had knit kind of before and after washing and blocking. And it was just a really great reminder and inspiration to get this shawl and a few of my other shawls into the wash bath and block them. And the blocking process just opens everything up. So while this shawl might have been about this big when I finished knitting it, now it's, yay big and perfect size for wrapping. If you're interested in knitting this shawl and you're wondering how much yarn you need, I used, for the background color, this was Megan's, the Wolfman, the brown. I used just over 2 ounces of this, and this is for the smaller size of the shawl. There are 2 different sizes. One is about this size, and one allows you to get, I think, 2 more repeat rows in there, 2 or 3 more. So I used about a little over 2 ounces of the background brown, and then about 1.5 ounces of the Hedgehog contrast variegated color. So you don't need very much yarn. You could do this kind of project if you had scraps left over from your sock yarn. It would be perfect for it. I was just so excited about the pattern and actually knitting up some of Megan's beautiful yarn that I just went for it. So it's kind of perfect. So those are my 2 finished objects. I will adorn the model with with the shawl now, since it's warm in here. And I have some works in progress that I thought I'd share with you. One of them, really, I went back, I've been watching Felicia Lowe's Craftsy class again on color and spinning. incredible class. If you're interested in color, if you feel like you can't do anything with color, if you don't feel like you understand color, if you have tons of braids that are all these different colors and you want to figure out how to spin them, I mean, watch her class. It's amazing. She has a book out as well now. Both are excellent resources if you're just needing some help figuring out how to use your braids. And she inspired me to want to spin up a gradient yarn, and I haven't gotten there yet, but I've been kind of playing around with some of the things in my stash to figure out which one will become the gradient yarn. And as I was doing that, I realized that in my spinning bag, I had some beautiful BFL, basically one of my favorite braids ever, that I got a long time ago and was afraid to spin because I felt like it was so beautiful and I didn't know what to do with it and what would happen if I spun it, and I hadn't spun BFL before, and BFL is blue-faced Leicester, so it's a kind of longer wool. You can't spin, you want to be careful spinning it because it'll become really ropey really fast if you spin it with too tight of a twist, too high of a ratio. But I realized I had this BFL in my spinning bag, and I thought, oh, I really want to finish it, and I want to do it as a singles and do it right, because it was supposed to be just BFL. So I spun it up, and I spun up the first part of it back when I didn't really know that much about spinning, and I spun up the rest now when I know a little bit more about spinning. So I did spin it at a 7-to-1 ratio on my Ladybug, on the medium whirl, which would be on the Matchless, a 9-to-1 ratio, and this is the result. So this is the BFL spun at the 7-to-1 ratio, and I'm going to turn this into just a singles. It felt a little bit like this was a D-stash, so I don't know much about the braid except that it's BFL. As I was spinning it, it felt a little bit like it had some nylon in it, just because I noticed when I was spinning Knitting in France's beautiful Rolegs, they had some nylon in it, and it feels just a little bit different when you're spinning with a little bit of nylon added in. So I think this has some nylon in it, but that won't matter because it's not a super wash. And so I'm gonna pull it off the bobbin today, and I'm gonna full it, hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water, thwack it a little bit to try to get it to just set a little bit, and then I'll just leave it as a singles because the color and the color repeats are so beautiful in this. They're kind of long purples and pinks, browns, some kind of light salmony yellows, and so this is going to turn into yarn today, and I'm pretty excited about that. And those are, I guess that's it for finished objects and works in progress. So a couple of the things I wanted to mention today are some patterns that I'm going to be working on that I'm really excited about. And the first one, since I finished 3 sweaters this year so far. Clearly it's a year for sweaters, and I feel like I am on a roll with them. So for some of you who read the blog, you know that I love Jennifer Woodhouse of Woodhouse Knits, or Jennifer Wood of Woodhouse Knits, and her designs are really beautiful, and she designed the small scarf that I wear oftentimes, the kind of beautiful brown one that's got all the lace and cables in it. Well, in her last newsletter, she put a teaser out for the next sweater, and so I've been kind of in the back of my mind like that was going to be my next sweater, and so every time I looked for a new sweater project on Ravelry, nothing quite compared to like this image in my mind of what I thought I would be knitting. And just this past week, her pattern, she dropped the pattern. So I have it here on Ravelry. I want to show it to you. This is the Ella cardigan. I think you can see it there pretty well. I'll show you a couple other images of it. There we go. It's a beautiful cable lace cardigan with these panels all the way up the front and up the back, right? So this just came out, I think, on Tuesday, and Jennifer Wood is running a cowl for this particular sweater. Now, I've never done a cowl, like ever, if you can believe that. But I'm doing this one. So I got my yarn, and I decided to just make my life easy and go with, I know you guys are like, what? You did what with the yarn? You're not just picking some random yarn and modifying all the patterns? Like, well, I thought I'd make my life easy for once, since this is all cable and lace, and I'm not messing with that right now. So I went ahead and got pretty much exactly the yarn that she knit her version in. This is the Polka Dot Sheep Ski Town Sport in platinum. All right, I'll show you the back here. And they are offering, for anyone else who's interested in knitting this particular sweater with this particular yarn, Polka Dot Sheep, which is in Montana, is actually offering a discount on the yarn, 15% discount. And if you buy, I think if you spend something like 75 bucks, they'll give you free shipping too. So if you're into this sweater, you should totally go do that now. I think that's gonna run out like May 21st, maybe, something like that. The cowl just started on the 16th, and I've done my swatch. So I'll show you my swatch. This is done, the pattern calls for size 3 needles. I'm a tight knitter, you guys know that. So I went with size 4 for this, and it's still not quite at gauge. So when I cast on, I'm gonna cast on with a size 5 needle, and I'm only 2 stitches off and 2 rows off, so I think going up 1 more needle size, which will be I think that'll end up being a full 0.5 millimeter altogether, should be about right for me. I also ordered a little bit of extra yarn for this particular sweater because I want to knit it with longer sleeves. Right now the sleeves, you can see the sweater I'm wearing is probably, I think the sleeves for this sweater are about that length, you know, like a 3/4 length sweater. And I want to have longer sleeves. And the body of the sweater that in the pattern is a very short kind of sweater. I think it would sit, excuse me, maybe at the top of your hips. And I like my sweaters a little bit longer, so I ordered an extra skein of yarn to be able to make those modifications, which will not be very difficult in terms of messing with the cable and the lace, so I'm happy about that. And so that's one knit that is on the way, and I will put in the show notes all the information about the polka dot sheep yarn and the pattern and the cow in her Ravelry group and things like that if anyone's interested in getting involved. The other pattern that I found recently that I just absolutely have to knit is Leslie Ann Robinson's Rebel 2. And I don't know if any of you guys have come across this pattern. This is me, you know, spending a lot of late nights on Ravelry trying to find different things. So it's a beautiful shawl that's got a little bit of brioche in it. And this is what it looks like full out. Now she says in the directions, because I've already downloaded the pattern, she says that you don't need to have experience with brioche stitch to be able to work her pattern, and so I'm going to try that. I also, though, enrolled in a craftsy class a while back on brioche knitting, which I've been slowly kind of taking in, and that'll be my resource for how to do some of the stitches, the knit and purl brioche stitch. But I love the shawl because I love the kind of simplicity of it and the colors and the fact that it's not too fussy. You know, I'm not like a super, I've always been kind of a tomboy, and I've not really into like super fussy feminine kind of things. And so that shawl to me looks kind of cool, and it's based on Princess Leia, who I don't really know all that much about. I'm not really a Star Wars person. Like, I know I teach science fiction, and I know that Star Wars is one of those things you're supposed to like totally be into, but it's not my thing. I appreciate though that it's based on Leia from Star Wars, and I do let my students talk about Star Wars in class, like for like 1 minute, and then not so much. I know that that's not going to go over so well with some of you. I'm a total nerd. I'm a science fiction geek. I am a lot of things, but I'm not a Star Wars person. I'm sorry. That's like, that just slipped out. I have to let you guys know at some point, right? Like, you have to know who you're listening to. Star Trek? Sure, sign me up. I'm there. Well, there we go. That's the divide. I know I'm going to lose half of you at this point. Sorry. Anyway, the Rebel shawl, Rebel 2 shawl is based on Princess Leia, and I've chosen these 2 yarns to knit it with. One is this, they're both Madeline Tosh, Tosh Merino Light, which is a singles yarn. I've used this particular type of yarn before for my Waiting for Rain shawl. Actually, this was the main background color that I used for Waiting for Rain, and I used a kind of lighter blue for the lace panels. So this time the darker blue will be the main background, and the lighter gray, which I had left over, will be the kind of little bits and pieces of brioche on the bottom of the pattern. So yay for new patterns, for learning new skills. I will let you guys know how the brioche knitting goes. And that's all the knitting for now. So I have a couple of other little bits and pieces to share with you guys, little acquisitions from the past couple weeks. The first is a beautiful bag that came from Hawthorne Cottage Craft from Kate. I saw one of her bags, well, I've been watching her podcast. She has a wonderful podcast. She's coming, she podcasts from Ireland, and she's just really a delightful woman to listen to. And it turns out she is also quite the amazing seamstress. So she makes these beautiful project bags. I've never bought a project bag for myself, but I thought I'd splurge on this because I saw one of her project bags in another podcast. I think it might have been Sarah of Fiber Trek. And I thought to myself, God, that is beautiful. So this is the project bag. It's big enough for the sweater that I'm going to be knitting, so I'm going to put all my sweater yarn in there. It has some cool contrast fiber on the inside. Fabric on the inside. This is her beautiful little card and stitch marker, which I think, you know, if you're going to have a cottage craft podcast and Etsy shop, yes, having a little beautiful cottage on your card is pretty amazing. Okay, so back to the bag. It has some snaps here so that you could have it stand up on its own and just be snapped shut. And it has a nice flat bottom so that you could just set it. But you can also fold it down and button the front. And it has a really cool little strap on the side. So beautiful bag. I'm looking forward to throwing my Ella cardigan in here as I work on it, and kind of having a really nice project bag to go along with a beautiful sweater. So I'm glad, Kate, thank you so much for the bag, for shipping it across the ocean. It's beautiful, and I'm looking forward to hopefully featuring Kate and her work on the podcast, and well, on the blog. We'll do a blog feature soon enough so that you can see even more and hear even more about her seamstressing. So one other acquisition I really wanted to talk to you guys about is actually an old book. This is from 2002, and it's Lynn Vogel, and it's called The Twisted Sisters Sock Workbook. And I picked this up from one of my lovely guildmates, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. Hi, Debbie. She had some knitting books that she was ready to part with, and this was one of them. And one of the things I've always been really fascinated by is not only how do you blending yarns that are going to be appropriate for socks, right? If you're going from fiber to yarn to sock, like what are some of the things to think about, but also color. And the really cool thing about this book is that it's been going along with, like I said, the Felicia Lowe craftsy class that I've been taking, and what was the other thing? Felicia Lowe's book about color. And this is another nice kind of, there are sections in here that provide a really great overview of how to divide up braids if you're trying to go for particular kinds of colorways, how to split them up, ways to think about color. And I just find that these kinds of things, and the cool thing is that when she talks about how to split up a braid, she'll refer you to another page where she has that kind of braid, like a braid with speckles, or a braid that has different colors at different intervals, or braids that are longer staple length fiber, and how that will work with shorter runs of color or color runs that are longer than the staple length. So all kinds of different really great information about how to mess with color and how to use your braids to their best. Kind of not only thinking about what kind of sheep and fiber would be good for socks, but also how to break up the colors if you want to do a self-striping yarn, how to make that. So a lot of really good DIY hacks, tricks, tips for those kinds of questions that have been really like burning my brain. And so I'm really enjoying reading this book. And like I said, it's an older book from Interweave, so I'm not sure where copies are available. I'm just really thankful to have one. I'm guessing libraries and, maybe like used bookstores might have this kind of thing. I would highly recommend it if you're interested at all in color theory, working with color and fiber, or thinking about how to knit or how to spin up sock yarn for particular kinds of projects. So those are my acquisitions, and I wanted to, in the last bit here, we have the giveaway, and that is super exciting. So in the last episode, I shared with you guys some of my first spinning and knitting as a way to help get the word out to anyone listening to these podcasts that, yeah, you see beautiful things and finished objects and people working really hard at their craft, but we all started somewhere and we all have a story about where we came from as spinners and knitters. And I wanted to show you my first skein of yarn and that I ever spun up, and my first sock that I ever knit. And they're not beautiful pieces of they're not beautiful pieces of art or craft on the one hand, if you're measuring them by what you could potentially achieve, but they're beautiful because they're beginnings. They're the things that we all started with, and we all come from somewhere. So I asked folks to share their spinning and knitting stories and share advice to other spinners and knitters who are just starting out. And if you shared something either on crinkling, if you shared something either on the blog or in our Ravelry group, you were entered to win this beautiful bat from Ranching Tradition Fiber and the fine issue of Ply magazine. Yay! As a way to get you excited about spinning and trying to work on your spinning and increase your ability to spin. So I did a random number generated winner based on the entries in Ravelry and on YouTube. And the winner is number 20, Talia Rivera. So Talia, congratulations. And this is what Talia wrote in. She said, "Hi, I'm a new spinner. Just started January this year, 2017. Congratulations. You're hooked for life. And I can say that practice daily, if possible, makes the yarn so much better. I just finished a skein of Polwarth Tencel," and she says, risky move, I know, "and had to run the singles twice through the wheel because they were so underspun, and ran the plied yarn twice more for the same reason. Even though the yarn looks way better now, I know that I still have a long way to go, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much for sharing your beginnings with us. It's inspiring. Talia." So Talia, congratulations. You're the winner of this week's giveaway, and if you can get in touch with me, I will get these beautiful things in the mail to you. And looking forward, we have, since I was offering these, one of the things I was offering was this bat from Cami Noise at Ranching Tradition Fibers. I think it's gonna show up there, maybe. Cami got in touch with me and she said, would you like it if I sponsored one of your podcasts? And I said, yeah, that sounds great, Cami. So Cami is going to sponsor a couple of podcasts, and I have a great giveaway that's coming up from her on the blog next Saturday, and we'll extend that into the podcast a little bit for a beautiful set of like a raw fiber sample pack, basically, so that you can learn to wash different kinds of fiber and then play around with different kinds of fiber. So that's coming up as a giveaway in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned for that kind of thing. And otherwise, I think I'm about ready to sign out for the day. So thanks so much for stopping by and tuning in, and I hope that you have some excellent knitting and spinning adventures in the next couple of weeks until I see you again. So take care. Thanks for coming by. See ya. So a couple of things, and I can hear Spencer coming in the back door.
Noise.
Noise. What the heck? It's like this podcast actually takes place in some kind of like household where there are living, breathing human beings or something.
Noise over.
Okay.